And welcome everybody to Monster Monday for February 8th, 2020. I'm your host, DM Gallibond. Now, tonight on Monster Monday, we are going to be taking a look a uh, at a set of creatures that came to D&D out of the Mythic Odysseys of Theros sourcebook. And these are the Anvilwrought Creatures. They first came out in the Theros block of Magic the Gathering um, back in the 2013, 2014 timeframe, I want to say is when that was released. And Mythic Odysseys of Theros, that um, source book came out for D&D last year in 2020, and it's kind of a throwback to the ancient Greeks. The entire plane as imagined in Magic the Gathering and the entire setting as imagined in D&D has a lot of echoes of Greek mythology. And so there's a lot of the same kinds of creatures, and if you're even a casual student of the classic Greek myths, you'll see a lot of echoes in not only the names of heroes and monsters, but even in some of the legends that go along with the Mythic Odysseys of Theros sourcebook. Um, it's almost like the people at Wizards of the Coast said, wow, there's this whole cultural mythology there that's all in the public domain, ripe for the plundering, and so let's just take it and use it for our IP. And that seems like pretty much exactly what they did. All right, so before we go too much farther, I've got to say thank you over to Mo at the Tabletop Bellhop. Mo is the OG when it comes to everything tabletop games, whether you're into card games, board games, party games, tabletop RPGs, whatever. Mo has everything over there, links where you can buy stuff, learn about what's coming up in the industry, follow game developers and various publishers, and a whole galaxy and constellation of people who do podcasts and streams related to these tabletop games. So anything you want to know about it, go over there. There's also, we have the Patreon over at patreon.com/dmgallibond if you want to help us do even more on this here channel. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the Anvilwrought Creations are. Um, the in the lore of both Magic the Gathering and D&D, the first anvil rots were created by the god of the forge, Perforos. He gave the secret of breathing life into these metal creatures to his most devoted followers so they could mimic his works and invent new forms in their own forges. Some of these are vigilant guardians at holy shrines, or they serve as messengers or familiars. And then some of them are created to emulate the beauty in nature. Um, and each one exhibits abilities suited to its role, some of them behaving like companionable creatures, others as stoic guardians. And there are several very rare and valuable anvil rods crafted by the hand of Perforos himself for specific purposes. Now, those haven't been transported specifically to D&D, so we're not going to talk about them. But keep in mind that those do exist as cards, and anybody who follows my Sunday game, the Planeswalking Walker of Waterdeep game, you guys will know that I always go and mine Magic the Gathering for creatures, and then I create um, whole brand new creatures based on cards from Magic the Gathering for my D&D players to fight. And I like to pull tricks on them, like using the same kind of synergy that cards and Magic the Gathering have, so it makes the fights a little more difficult. But that's okay because the players in my Sunday game are really good, and their characters are very powerful, so they can deal with stuff like that. But it's kind of a fun exercise to go through and transpose characters from one milieu to the other. All right, and because they are all constructs, an important thing to keep in mind about these is they don't require air, food, drink, or sleep. And this particular one here is an example of the bronze sable. Now, what we're going to do when we look at the lore is we're going to look at the specific cards from Magic that go along with the monsters that were brought over to D&D, and then a little later in the show, we will look at the stat blocks for these as they exist as D&D monsters. So the Anvilwrought Raptor is an artifact creature, casting cost of 4, power of 2, toughness 1. It has flying and first strike. This is not really a Magic the Gathering show, so I'm not going to go through what all those abilities mean. If you are a fan, you can go over to the Gatherer, gatherer.wizards.com. That is a database of all the cards, and if you go to any card that has special abilities and you want to know what those abilities mean, you can actually click on the hyperlink of the ability, and it will take you to a rules page that tells you what that ability does in terms of the game. So it's an uncommon card, and the flavor text, I know it's lightness, for I've seen it fly. I know it's weight, because I've seen it strike. Attributed to Brigon, who's a soldier of Miletus. Miletus is one of the kingdoms that makes up the Theros plane. All right, and now we see the Bronze Sable, which we saw on a previous page. It's a 2 casting cost artifact creature, power 2 and toughness of 1, and it's a common card from the Theros expansion. Once again, it has a little flavor text. A champion stood alone between the Horde of the Return and the shrine to Karametra, cutting down scores among hundreds. She would have been overcome if not for the aid of the temple guardians whom Karametra awakened. So presumably, the Sable is one of the creatures that was created as a guardian that is there to help heroes who are on a mission from the gods, if you will. All right, now this is a really weird looking one, and that's one of the things that's so fun about Magic the Gathering monsters is that the artwork on some of these is just totally strange and really weird. I love it, and my players love it too. So the Burnished Heart is an artifact creature, 3 casting cost artifact creature with power of 2 and toughness of 2. Has a special ability that lets you search your deck for 2 additional basic land cards, put them in play if you're willing to sacrifice the Burnished Heart in exchange. And it's an uncommon card from Theros, forged by divine hands to wander mortal realms. And you'll notice that unlike the elk that we are used to, instead of the antlers sort of sticking up and out, they sort of fan out and down. Makes it, I don't know, makes it look like it's wearing an umbrella on its head that, has lost all of its fabric or something. So it's kind of a weird looking creature there. All right, and then we have the Gold Forged Sentinel. It's a 6 casting cost artifact creature with power 4, toughness 4, and flying. It's an uncommon card from the Journey into Nyx expansion. Blessed by the gods, coveted by mortals, beholden to neither. So this is obviously a little bit tougher creature and costs a little bit more to bring out on your board. But it still has that nifty flying ability. All right, now, when they transported these creatures from Magic the Gathering into D&D, one thing you will be aware of if you've looked through the monster manual at all, or any of the other source books that have monsters in them, you'll know that every creature in D&D has a type. And in D&D, the type for these creatures is construct. And constructs are made, they're not born. Some constructs are programmed by their creators to follow a simple set of instructions. Others are imbued with sentience and capable of independent thought. Golems are the iconic constructs. Many creatures native to outer planes of Mechanus, such as Modrons, are constructs shaped from the raw material of the plane by the will of more powerful creatures. And in this case, the Anvilwroughts are shaped by the will of Porphyros, either directly for the individual ones that he created, or indirectly by him giving the secret of how to imbue life into these creations to his devoted followers. So it does come from that. So in that case, in D&D terms, they're similar to Warforged, but they have a little bit more of a divine lineage, and unlike Warforged, which truly have sentience, it's kind of left up to the DM and the players whether whether these creatures actually have any sentience or whether they're just sort of built with a specific task, like more like a golem is in in D&D. All right, now this is where we go and we take a look at the mechanical features of the Anvilwrought creatures. Let's go ahead and switch over here. We're going to first look at um, some information from the Magic the Gathering wiki. And this is the wiki page on the plane of Theros. Theros is the plane where Theros Black and other Theros sets take place. It's similar to Hellenic Greece. Name may be from the ancient Greek word Theros, meaning summer. It may also may be a portmanteau of the words the and heroes, considering the heavy emphasis of heroes in the plane. Um, so yes, it has the plane where all the action takes place, or the mortal realm, if you will, is the realm of Theros. Then there is a realm of the gods called Nyx, which is often depicted as sort of just a starry field, similar, very similar to the way that the astral sea is depicted in classical D&D um, cosmology, if you will. So the gods live in Nyx, the mortals live in Theros. Um, there's this whole history of how the Titans preceded the gods and how the worship of the people actually sprang the first gods into existence. And then those gods begat other gods who then, superseded the original gods. And then that next level of gods created their offspring is like the third generation of gods, which is the current generation of deities. And the Titans are locked away in the underworld. So there's always sort of the potential, if you run a D&D campaign in this, that could always be a plot, is that somebody might be trying to free the Titans. And that would be something that heroes might have to go and do. Another page we're going to look at from the Magic the Gathering wiki is the page for the god of the forge, Porphyros. He is the one that gave the secret of creating the Anvilwrought creatures um, to his followers. Now, you're saying, wait a minute. I thought you were going to be talking about monsters. Why are you spending all this time talking about all this other ancillary stuff? The reason I'm talking about all this other ancillary stuff is because it's important to understand how these monsters fit into the mythology of the plane and give you some ideas as a DM if you want to take these monsters and extract them out of Theros turn around and put them in a homebrew campaign, you can sort of take echoes, understanding where they came from. You might have a God of the Forge in your own cosmology for your own homebrew world. Hey, these monsters would be a perfect thing maybe to be associated with their church or a a sect of that. If your players have never run into anything like that associated with this deity, maybe some of your players even worship this deity. They've never heard of these. Well, it could be a weird sect dedicated to this god or a foreign sect. So when your campaign goes off to a different continent, hey, they worship the same god, but wow, they have this. Why do they have this? Another little thread you can build into your campaign and have as something that you can pull on that your players can investigate and follow, and a MacGuffin they can run with and see where it leads them. All right. He Porphyros is depicted as an inspiring deity. He forges the most ornate and delicate items, only to dash them into flame and start all over again. And he there's a couple of particular items. Um, there's an item in the I think it's one of these cards down here. Um, there's a card, yes, called the Opaline Unicorn. And I believe it's on the card itself that it says because Porphyros fell in love with one of the other gods, he created this opaline unicorn as a gift basically for her. And the mechanic in the Magic the Gathering game is that it's a creature, so it acts like a creature, has all the abilities of a creature, but you can, instead of attacking with it or defending with it, you can tap it and you can then pull any color of mana that you want out of it. And I can't remember whether it has like a randomizing effect where you have to roll a die and figure out what color you get, or whether you just choose whatever color you want. So that's kind of a cool thing in there. That did not get transported over to D&D along with the others. So here's the Anvilwroughts. Again, talks a little bit about the different the history of how the Anvilwroughts came to be. And now we're going to take a look at the actual Anvilwrought monsters themselves. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. We are going to look at the Anvilwrought raptor. This is a tiny construct, so it's the size of a regular bird. Yes, this picture makes it look very large because it looks like this is a big statue and this thing is, but I think what this is meant as is you are looking at a bird close up and then all of that is back in the distance. But it's kind of weird. When I was looking at that picture at first, it's like, well, how big is this thing? And then you look at it where it says, oh, it's a tiny construct, so it must be just like the size of a songbird or something like that. Armor class of 14, natural armor, 18 hit points, uh, movement speed of 10, hopping around, and a fly speed of 60. Uh, it just is a pretty average beast-like spell block, or stat block, I should say. It's got abilities, kind of like a construct. It's immune to fire because it was created by a god of the forge, and it's immune to poison. It's also immune to being charmed, exhausted, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned. Has dark vision out to 120 feet and a passive perception of 14. Understands one language of its creator, but it cannot speak. And 1/2 challenge rating. Keen sight. The raptor has advantage on wisdom checks that rely on sight. And recorded mimicry. Now, this is an interesting ability. Raptor can mimic any sound, including voices it has heard in the last 24 hours. Creature that hears the sounds can tell they are imitations with a successful wisdom check. So this could be something that that a creator could make an Anvilwrought raptor and then use it kind of to deceive either friends or foes. You know, speak something in its hearing and have it go, tell it to go and repeat that in the same voice when it gets to a certain location at a certain time. So multi-attack, the raptor makes 2 attacks with its beak, plus 5 to hit, and 1d4 plus 3 piercing damage. Now, they also in D&D say, hey, maybe you could have one of these as a familiar. And it might replace a different kind of familiar that you have. Like, a very popular familiar is the owl. So it would replace the owl. The thing is that you would be able to get this recorded mimicry ability with the Anvilwrought Raptor, but you would not get the flyby ability that the owl has. So just keep that in mind if you're considering doing that, or if you're considering allowing your players to do that if you are in fact a DM. All right. Now we come to the bronze sable. First bronze sables were presented to Karametra as a gift by Porphyros to serve primarily as guardians in Karametra's temples. But as others have been created, some have been used as nimble scouts, always alert for danger. So these are a CR1 creature, so a little bit more powerful creature, armor class 15, 32 hit points, speed of 30 feet, and a climb speed of 30 feet. So specializes in stealth. Again, pretty much kind of a beast-like spell block. The same damage and condition immunities. Same dark vision and passive perception of 12. Again, understands one language of the creator but can't speak. False appearance. While the sable remains motionless, it's indistinguishable from a normal statue. Pack tactics. These guys get advantage on an attack roll against a creature if at least one of its allies is within 5 feet and the ally isn't incapacitated. And surprise attack. If it surprises a creature and hits with an attack, it takes an extra 3d6 damage from the attack. So they make 2 bite attacks. Each is plus 5 to hit, and 1d8 plus 3 piercing damage. So the Burnished Heart, this is again that one that has the sort of umbrella antlers. It's not depicted here in the monster manual. The first Anvilwroughts to be performed or forged by Porphyros. The hearts wander the mortal realm in search of new sites to bring back to the god of the forge. On every trip from Mount Velas, where Porphyros has his forge, they seek out the far reaches of the world so they can witness beauty in all its form and later reunite with their creator, their minds filled with tales of how life's splendor continues to develop. Armor class 14, 45 hit points, speed of 50 feet, and these are CR2. So they're, again, a little bit more powerful. And you can see that they have slightly elevated strength and dex and everything, but then, beast-like in their intelligence. Now, the one thing where you can tell these are not beasts is by the wisdom score, because the wisdom of most beasts is somewhere in the 10 to 12 range. It's very rare that you see a beast that has a wisdom above that. But these guys have a little bit more wisdom because they kind of have tasks that they are told to do. Understands language but can't speak. Charge if it moves at least 20 feet. The target will take an extra 2d6 fire damage, and it needs to succeed on a DC 13 strength save or be knocked prone. Heated body, a creature that touches the heart or hits it with a melee attack while within 5 feet takes 1d10 fire damage. Has advantage on strength or dex checks made against effects that would knock it prone. 2 attacks, one with its antlers, one with its hooves. The antlers deal 1d8 plus 3 damage, and the hooves deal 1d4 plus 3 bludgeoning damage. And then we have our gold forged sentinel. Original purpose of the Sentinels is a mystery. All of Porphyros's original Anvilwroughts, this construct is most difficult to control. Often operates without a master, stalking the high places of the mortal world, or waiting still as a statue for what could be decades before reanimating to carry out their mysterious purpose. Now, these are large constructs, armor class 16, hit point 76, CR of 5, and a speed of 40 and a flying speed of 60. Uh, they're immune to fire and poison, same condition immunities as the others, same dark vision, also uh, understands language but can't speak, and a passive perception of 16. Has that same charge ability. Uh, this time, the target takes 3d6 bludgeoning damage and DC 15 to avoid being knocked prone. And now this one also has spell turning. So advantage on saving throws against any spells that target only the sentinel and not an area of effect. Um, and if the sentinel saving throw succeeds and the spell is of 4th level or lower, spell has no effect at all and instead targets the caster. So that's really powerful. So if you try to, let's say, shoot a fireball at this because you don't know that it's already immune to fire, it can not only can it, just like completely ignore that. If it makes it save, it can turn that fireball around and hit you with it. So that's pretty bad. That's actually a pretty neat trick for a construct. You would like to go adventuring with one of these guys on your side. Multi attack. The Sentinel makes 2 ram attacks. Melee attack plus 7 to hit and 2d8 plus 4 bludgeoning damage. And it has fire breath. Yes, folks, it's a fire breathing construct. It exhales fire in a 15-foot cone. Every creature makes a DC 15 dex save or takes 68 fire damage on a failed save or half as much on a successful one. So that's not bad. The range on that is on par with a Dragonborn, like a red Dragonborn, but it's a significantly elevated damage from what low level dragonborns are able to put out. So 68 fire damage. That's nothing to sneeze at. Now of course if you're fighting things that are immune to fire, big deal. But most things, especially if they are made of flesh, they do burn. And if you're lucky, you can turn them into bacon. And anything that you can turn into bacon, that winds up being pretty good at the end of the day. All right, so let's go back and look at return to our slides again. Now, one thing that we always talk about here on Monster Monday is how would you use these creatures in encounters? And the way I think of it, because as a DM for me, um, nice group size is always 4 or 5. So I think, okay, if I were going to create a hard challenge for a party of 5 characters, where would this monster fall if it were the main thing that the party were encountering? So because these are all different challenge ratings, we're just going with one of these monsters, and we're going to go with that Gold Forge Sentinel, the last one we looked at. So it's a CR5 monster. Now, if you have a level 3 party of five PCs, all level 3, you throw them against one Gold Forge Sentinel, that will be a hard encounter. Now, what does a hard encounter mean? By the book, by the DM's guide, it means that your party will probably survive that fight, but they're probably going to have to use a lot of spells, and at least some of the party members will probably be below half health by the time the fight is over. That's a hard encounter for the party. If your party is level 4 and you throw them against just one of these guys, it's going to be a medium encounter. Now, if you want to turn it into a hard encounter, you can add one of those modrones that they talked about. So the little mechanical cube-like monsters, and the modrone is the little is the lowest challenge rating one of those. I think it's a 1/8 challenge rating actually. Now, if your party is in the range of level 5 to level 7, putting it up against one of these is an easy encounter. So now, if we go to the top of that range at level 7, if you want to make it a hard encounter, you can add a second Gold Forge Sentinel and one of those Burnished Hearts. So that would be a CR5 or two CR5s and a CR2 put together would be a hard encounter for a level 7 party. Now, considering that all three of those monsters have the potential to knock your party members prone, and that two of them have the ability to fly and have fire breath, and that all of them are immune to fire, so that they don't have to worry about being caught in the crossfire of each other's fire breath. That could make for a very challenging fight. Um, but if you have a good party that works well together and understands each other's strengths and has a good mix of being able to fight both at range and up close, then you might wind up having a really fun encounter at level 7 by throwing that at them. All right. Now, where would you put these Anvilwrought creatures in a campaign? Well, first of all, if you're adventuring in Theros, the Mythic Odysseys of Theros already gives you some ideas of how you could use these. You know, you could use them as temple guardians. You could use them as messengers. You could use them as, uh, you know, uh, maybe they're supposed to be like companions to some uh, protagonist or possibly an antagonist of the party. That maybe there's some rogue sect of Porphyros, or maybe your party is aligned with a god that has a beef with Porphyros, and so they are constantly coming up against people that have some of these constructs in them. So you could put these into the campaign in one of several different ways. If you're not adventuring in Theros, maybe you have your adventure set in a different plane from the AD&D or from the D&D cosmology, or from a plane of your own homebrew design. Perhaps there's a plane like Mechanus, where the Modrons are from. The Anvilwroughts might be native to this plane. They might just be a different type of Modron. You could just take them right out of the Pharaoh source book, pivot over, drop them into that, and they would fit very nicely. You then can then just dispense with all of the lore about them being part of Porphyros and just make up your own lore about why they are there. Now, you could also, in a different homebrew environment, imagine something like. Now, I know this is a weird thing, but just follow me here. Uh, you can question later. Imagine there's a group of druids that somehow, for some reason, follows a god of the forge like Moradin. Maybe these druids, maybe for these druids, the Anvilwrought creatures are constructed guardians. Um, Now, you could imagine that these druids might live on a plane that is made entirely of metal, or that has a super high metal content, And on that plane, the way that uh, organic trees and plants grow with cellulose and with chlorophyll and with all that kind of stuff as part of the building blocks of the wood and everything, then um, maybe on that plane where there's such a high metal concentration, what passes for plants actually grows as metallic things. And so that's why your druids are gods of the forge or worship a god of the forge, is because they have you know they have these little there's this sort of lore about how the metal is actually the building block of all of the natural world. And then maybe you could just go whole hog and say the entire plane is made of metal, and somehow organic life grew up there, and these creatures are just beasts in that area. You can treat them like constructs because everything there is made of metal, but they're they actually would fulfill the same role in that world that beasts fulfill in the natural world, in the normal cosmology of D&D. So there's all kinds of different things that you can do and explain with how these characters are or how these creatures are in a different world. So now that would be the placement. But what if you wanted to do something completely different? What if you didn't want to do the Anvilwrought, but you wanted to use the Anvilwrought stat block to create a completely new creature? How could you reskin these creatures to make them something different? All right. Uh, think about this. Constructs already share a number of qualities with celestial, fiendish, and elemental creatures. They don't need to sleep, they don't need to eat or drink, they don't need to breathe. So this provides some potential inspiration to change the creature type and some of the power sources. Now, all of these have immunity to fire. But imagine that these didn't exist in the natural world, linked to a god of the forge. Imagine that versions of these exist on the elemental plane of Earth. Well, then, maybe they might be immune to acid instead of being immune to fire. Or if they exist on the elemental plane of air, they might be immune to lightning instead of being immune to fire. Or water, they might be, elemental plane of water, they'd be immune to cold instead of being immune to fire. Um, and then you could think of, well, what about if you took these and made celestial versions of them, or made infernal versions of them, made abyssal versions of them? So thinking about how you can just take the basic block, move it to a different plane, have a different energy source for it, have a different set of immunities for it from the aspect of the damage immunity that it has based on the plane it's connected to. You could really go ahead and uh, have a lot of fun with that. And if you think about the Burnished Heart and the Gold Forge Sentinel, they both have fire-based damage abilities. The heated body. You get close to it, you take damage. Well, if it's on the plane of water, then that could be cold damage instead of heat damage. Or in the airplane or the plane of air, it could be lightning instead of fire. So all of that kind of other stuff. So just think about that, and then obviously, if it's celestial, you could have that be radiant. If it's infernal, you could have that be uh, well, infernal, you could have it be one of several things, or you could even think about these things as something that exists on the plane of shadow, like the Shadowfell. So they could have like a necrotic power source, and so all of that could be necrotic. And there's just all kinds of weird things that you could do um, with these creatures. So just by taking that block and twisting it a little bit, and make something that your characters aren't or your players aren't expecting, and that's something new and unique to your game that doesn't exist anywhere else. All right, so now, as promised, we're going to go and take a look over at the um, uh, Q&A. At the moment, I don't see any questions here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the wrap up. I will come back and I will check the chat again to see if there are any questions before we close out. All right. This has been Monster Monday. I have been DM Gallibond. If you want to know more about where you can find live streams that I do, this is my only one mic show. I do have 3 weekly D&D games that I run on my Twitch channel. Sunday afternoons at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we have the Walker of Waterdeep. That is a planeswalking campaign where we are exploring different planes from Magic the Gathering and have a storyline that is taking the players all over the place. On Thursday nights at 8 p.m., we have the Sword Coast Chronicles. That is our love letter to the published 5e campaigns. We are right now in the Out of the Abyss storyline. They have played through parts of the Tyranny of Dragons storyline. They dipped a little bit um, into the Princes of the Apocalypse storyline. They are now in the Out of the Abyss storyline, and I have promised them that we will be weaving in and out of a number of campaigns as we follow the story that it connects all of these and helps them to understand why are all these things happening right around the same time in the same little corner of the world. There's got to be some reason that's connecting all of them, and this campaign is going to be the reason that tells them why. And then Saturday night, we are doing a twist on a favorite game for a lot of people, The Lost Mine of Phandelver. That was the uh, basically the starter adventure that launched 5th edition D&D. But what we're doing is we're taking that same adventure and we are playing it with your your grandpa's D&D rules. We are going back to the 1970s to the original rule set as written by Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax. And we are playing this same adventure in those rules. And I tell you what, it's a lot different. Um, 5e is very forgiving to players. Original D&D was hardcore. When your character fell to 0 hit points, you were dead. DEAD, dead. No death saves, no going unconscious, no chance to bring them back except by resurrection. But you're just dead. And literally almost anything could kill you. We've had a PC die from a fall because the way climbing rules work, you have to climb halfway up the entire distance, then you make your climb check. And if you're halfway up like a 100-foot wall, you make your climb check at 50 feet, and if you fail, you take 50 feet of falling damage. Um, then poison is no joke. Giant spiders are save versus poison or die. It's not save versus poison or take damage. It's save versus poison or die. Uh, and so we've had people die that way. We've had people die from getting one good hit by a zombie. Will just take a low-level PC out because zombies hit pretty hard in this edition of the game. So it's very different. It's very fun, and the players are having a blast with it. And they are really embracing the whole notion of D&D. Make the game what you want. And so while it's a story that a lot of people are familiar with, it's probably never quite been played this way, not only because of the different rule set, but just because this set of characters has their own unique idea how they want to influence this particular world. So join us 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday nights for that game. You can find those actual play games right here on my Twitch channel. I also have a YouTube channel where there are archives of all of the live stream games. Those archives are current now through the end of 2020, and within the next couple of weeks, I hope that they will be up to date through at least January. And then I'm going to do my best to always try to keep them current at least to the end of the previous month. I may not always succeed in keeping them current to the actual week, but at least to the previous month once we get caught up. And then obviously we mentioned before we have the Patreon over there, so you can find me over there on that Patreon. So let's go back to the chat and see. Okay. Uh, yes, uh, the YouTube, uh, you can find a link down below on the Twitch channel. There's actually a link there that will take you to it. Or if you just search for me as DM Gallibond on YouTube, you'll find me that way as well. All right. Well, thank you for stopping by tonight. We really appreciate it. And for those of you that come by during the week and watch, we really appreciate you stopping by and watching the stream. Go check out all of the previous Monster Mondays we have over on the archives over in YouTube. And I will sign off like I do every week by reminding you to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.